Welcome to a sleepy journey. But not a boring one. Tonight, we'll turn the pages of the tumultuous history of the Ashkenazi Jews, from their earliest exiles to the deeply ingrained memories of resistance flowing through their veins. You trudge through thick snow toward a crooked wooden door, the kind that doesn't open so much as creak in resignation. Inside, warmth flickers, not from a stove, those are for richer families, but from a single oil lamp wobbling gently on a rough-hewn table. The flame is so faint it seems embarrassed to exist. You're 6 years old. Maybe 5. Hard to tell, you've never had a birthday party, and the shtetl doesn't own a proper calendar. But you do have today. And today is your first lesson. The Rebbe sits like a boulder hunched in wool and mystery. His beard is a territory of its own, small things might live in it, and no one would be surprised. He doesn't speak yet. He just gestures to the bench beside him. You sit. The wood is colder than outside, your fingers are raw, your nose is leaking, and your brain, until this very moment, has been mostly occupied with potatoes, icicles, and an occasional dream about a horse that talks. But now you are handed a slate, a feather, and a single instruction, Aleph. You stare at it, 2 strokes and a dot. It looks like something that broke in the wrong direction. The Rebbe leans close. You smell onions, wax, something sour that might be theology. His voice is dry and slow. This is where it starts. You blink. Just this? This little shape, yes, he says, as if reading your thoughts. He does that. It's the first letter of the alphabet, yes. But also the first letter of Emet. Truth. You do not yet know what truth is. But it sounds important. The Rebbe dips a wooden pointer into honey, real honey, which in this village is rarer than gold, since gold can't cure coughs or cover burned porridge. He drags the pointer across the Aleph written on the page before you, then presses it to your lips. It tastes like sunlight trapped in a secret. You smile. Torah, he says softly, should be sweet to your tongue. That way, maybe you'll come back for more. You're not sure how effective this is, but between your grumbling stomach and your growing curiosity, the Rebbe's trick has worked. You want more letters. You trace the shape again. Aleph. Silent. Not a sound, but the root of all sound. You're too young to grasp the philosophy, but your hands memorize the motion. 1 stroke, then another, then the dot, always the dot. You wonder what happens if the dot goes missing. You'll ask later. Outside, the wind groans through the wall like an old man with bad knees. A cat hisses under the floorboards. Somewhere, someone's baby is crying, maybe for food, maybe for warmth, maybe for a lullaby no one remembers. You grip the slate tighter. Across the table, other children, some with frostbitten fingers, some with eyes too old for their age, mimic your movements. There is no homework, no grades, no recess. Just letters, whispered meanings, and the Rebbe occasionally rapping a knuckle on the desk when someone tries to sneak in a cough louder than the Shema. You're not learning for college, because there's no such thing here. You're not learning to get ahead, because there's no ladder. You're learning because somewhere, deep in the spine of this community, learning is survival. It is prayer and rebellion in the same breath, and the Rebbe knows it. He teaches slowly, not just because the oil is running out but because he is dragging eternity 1 syllable at a time. The Torah, he once joked, is longer than winter and twice as merciless. You weren't sure if he was serious. You're still not. You yawn. Not from boredom, from the effort of holding still. The slate's edge has made a line on your wrist. The cold air scratches at your ears. But the Aleph stays with you. It feels like something planted. Something ancient. Something that will sprout when you least expect it. Historians still debate what made the shtetl so fertile for learning, especially when it was so infertile for almost everything else. Was it the communal memory of exile? A cultural obsession with text? Or maybe, just maybe, a long, stubborn refusal to let ignorance be a second exile. A candle sputters. The Rebbe sighs, but continues. You wonder how many children have sat here before you. How many whispered the same letters into the dark. You imagine them lined up behind you, shadows reciting in rhythm, voices layered like an invisible choir. You imagine someone. Centuries from now, doing the same. There's a boy beside you picking his nose. There's a girl 2 benches down mouthing every letter as if casting a spell. There's an older child, 12, maybe, who has already begun correcting the Rebbe when he quotes Rashi, which earns him a look that could curdle milk. Your fingers itch. You copy another letter. Then another. You want to make the whole word now. You want to know what it means. You want to understand why grown men cry when they read these scrolls aloud. Your stomach growls. Someone hands you half a boiled turnip. You don't ask where it came from. In time, you'll learn more letters. You'll chase meaning through Aramaic footnotes and get lost in debates about the placement of a single dot. But right now, all you have is Aleph. A tiny shape. A whisper of a start. A breath without sound, and yet, somehow, the first sound of everything. The flame dances once more, as if to nod, and you, child of ice and ink, smile in the dark, your slate covered in crooked letters and sticky honey. By morning, your slate is smudged and your fingers are sticky. You slept beside the stove, or what passes for one, really just a metal box with ambition. There's no real fire inside, just the ghosts of last night's coal, but someone's Zaid swears it's warm if you squint. The house creaks like it's trying to remember a happier century. Your mother has already boiled the same potato twice, once for dinner, once for hope, and now it's breakfast. She breaks it in half, adds a sprinkle of salt, and gives you the bigger side. You're not sure if that's love or resignation. Maybe both. Today you go back to the cheddar. The Rebbe greets you with a grunt that might mean good morning or sit down before I change my mind. You do. The bench groans. So do you. The letters come quicker today. Bet, Gimel, Dalet. Each one a doorway, each one with a story the Rebbe insists you'll understand when you're older, which seems unfair but vaguely inspiring. He pulls out a new trick. Not honey this time, but a story. A riddle, even. What, he asks, is heavier than lead, lighter than wind, burns hotter than fire, but lives in silence? You blink, someone guesses Cholent. Someone else whispers Torah. The Rebbe just smiles like a man who has seen too many answers that were almost right. It's devotion, he says finally. The kind that keeps you here even when the windows rattle. You wonder why that sounds more frightening than poetic. There is honey again, though. A tiny jar, nearly empty. You don't ask where it came from. He dips the pointer and lets a single drop fall onto the next letter. You taste it before reading, the way some people test bathwater. It's not as sweet this time. You think that's intentional. This, the Rebbe says, is Lamed. The tallest letter. It reaches up like it's trying to touch heaven. Some say it's the first letter of Lev, heart. Others say it's there to remind you that even knowledge needs aspiration. You want to believe this. You do. But you're also 7 now, and you've just discovered sarcasm, so, you ask, if I write a bigger letter, do I get more heart? The Rebbe doesn't smile. But he doesn't sweat you either. That's practically a standing ovation. Later, he lets you try a quill, real feather, not just a chewed reed like the other children use. You tremble. Not because of the ink, but because the feather still has the curve of the goose in it. Like it remembers flying. You dip it anyway, the ink runs. Of course it does. You blot it with your sleeve. Your mother won't be happy, but that's tomorrow's sermon. The page is blotched, but the letters survive. Aleph. Bet. Lamed. They sit together now, like old men at a market, arguing about something ancient and pointless. Historians today argue over how deeply these early educational customs impacted Jewish cognitive culture. Some say it's the repetition, the memorization, the daily wrestling with abstract thought. Others point to the environmental pressure. When the world wants you silent, every word you learn is an act of resistance, but what they rarely discuss is the honey. The insistence, subtle, almost silly, that sacred learning must begin with sweetness. That even the hardest truths should start with a taste of joy. You remember your Zayd saying once, between coughs and kvetches, the Goyim raise soldiers. We raise questioners. The Rebbe, for all his beard and bile, teaches you the same. Every letter is a question. Every word is a puzzle. Every scroll is a debate with your own ancestors, most of whom would definitely tell you you're wrong. You get better at the strokes. You begin writing vertically, then backward, just to test your own stubbornness. The Rebbe doesn't scold. He raises one eyebrow, which means, cute. Don't do it again. You're not sure when it happens, but sometime between Lamed and Mem, you realize the room is warmer. Not physically, no one has fed the stove, but warmer in that way the heart registers before the body catches up. You look around. The girl with the whisper lips is now reciting Vahavta without faltering. The nose picker has graduated to picking arguments. Even the older boy who challenged the Rebbe. He now listens. Not quietly, but respectfully, which, for him, is close to sainthood. A letter drops off your quill, crooked but confident. You stare at it, wondering, what does this one mean? You forget that meaning isn't always instant. Sometimes it arrives years later. During a funeral, or a wedding, or while peeling onions in a kitchen too small for its grief, the Rebbe slumps slightly, then straightens. He's tired. You can see it now. The lines around his eyes are not just age, they're repetition. Thousands of children, thousands of letters, thousands of attempts to put fire into cold little hands, and yet, here he is again, dipping honey for the next one. You wonder if he ever tasted it himself. If anyone ever gave him the sweet before the sharp, he catches your glance and, just for a second, his eyes soften. Don't worry, he mutters, you'll ruin your back before you ruin your soul. It's the closest thing to encouragement he's said all week. The lesson ends with no bell. Just a quiet cough, a stretch, a murmured blessing. You step out into the wind, slate under your arm, honey still on your lips. You pass the butcher, who's arguing with the baker about interest rates and Ezekiel. You pass your mother, who smiles despite flour in her eyebrows. You pass your neighbor, who shovels snow like he's burying an empire. Your feet crunch against the frost, and each step feels heavier, not with burden, but with something like purpose. Or maybe just hunger. You're learning letters. They are small. They are slow. But they are how your people have survived empires, fires, and famine. One stroke at a time, and whether or not you know it yet, you're falling in love, with questions, with ink, with the maddening, holy mess of it all. You don't pack much, a threadbare scarf. A hunk of stale bread. One silver spoon that your mother insists is cursed but useful. And the scroll is wrapped in cloth, which is wrapped in more cloth, which is bound in string, which is hidden beneath a winter coat 2 sizes too big for you. It's heavy. Not like a rock, but like responsibility. Outside, dawn hasn't fully arrived, just a suggestion of gray leaking over the treetops. Your father listens to the wind like it's a rumor. His boots are already on. He gestures without speaking, and the entire family moves. You're not sure if this is exile number 4 or 7. You lost count somewhere between towns with broken signs and cousins you'll never see again. You walk, not because it's noble. Not because it's spiritual. You walk because staying would mean a knock at the door, and nobody survives the third knock. Mud swallows your shoes. Your sister's doll disappears somewhere between the river and that one cursed oak that everyone avoids. You try to comfort her, but your hands are frozen and your words are too shallow. So instead, you whisper her a letter. Aleph. She nods, half asleep. That's enough. The scroll shifts against your chest. You think about opening it. Just to look. Just to be sure it's still safe. But your mother sees the thought in your face and murmurs, no fingerprints on holy words. Then she adjusts your scarf so your ears don't fall off from windburn, and keeps walking. The trees thin. A village burns behind you. Smoke rises like prayer. Your people have carried Torahs across deserts, through swamps, under floors. One legend says a boy once memorized the entire book of Numbers during a cattle drive just so the scroll could be buried safely, and still be read aloud. Another version says it was a girl. That one, you like more, your scroll isn't particularly ancient. No famous rabbi's commentary. No gold edging. But your father swears the scribe who wrote it had a tremor in his left hand, so every shin looks like it's dancing. You believe him. At night, in the forest, the scroll becomes your pillow. You're not sure if that's reverent or sacrilegious, but there's no Talmudic precedent for this particular journey. You apologize to it anyway and pull your coat tighter. Someone snores. Someone cries. Somewhere, an owl mourns something invisible. You dream in letters. In the morning, a soldier rides past. You hold your breath. You're very good at holding your breath now. It's practically your family's second language. He doesn't stop. You walk again. The scroll grows heavier. Not physically, you checked. But it presses into your back like a secret trying to escape. Your uncle tells you a joke to pass the time. Why did the Torah scholar refuse to run? Because he believed in slow revelation. You roll your eyes so hard they almost freeze in place, but it helps. A little later, you pass a frozen stream. The kind that still sings under the ice. Your father kneels beside it and washes his hands, slow and ritual. He motions to you. You do the same. Then, gently, he uncovers the scroll and lets the ice-slick air brush its surface. It needs to breathe, he says. You nod. That makes as much sense as anything else this week. Some historians still argue whether these moments, families carrying Torahs on foot, from village to village, were widespread or isolated. Records are scarce. After all, no one files paperwork while running for their life. But the oral tradition says it happened often. That children memorized verses in exchange for extra potatoes. That elderly women sang blessings into bread crusts when parchment was gone. That in one Ukrainian town, a rabbi stitched an entire Genesis onto his coat lining, then wore it to America. Your version is simpler. You carry yours like a second spine. At a checkpoint, your mother distracts the guard by spilling soup on his shoes. She cries loud enough to embarrass him into letting you pass. You don't ask how many times she's rehearsed that routine. In the next town, a sympathetic innkeeper offers shelter for the night. You sleep on hay. Mice steal your last turnip. The scroll remains untouched, tucked beneath your bed. Wrapped in every layer you own, the Rebbe used to say, Torah doesn't run, but it remembers how. You understand that now. Every exile has left fingerprints on the scrolls. Not literal ones, your mother would faint, but smudges of human life, sweat, smoke, oil from midnight hands. You're part of that now. Whether you like it or not, at the border, your father gets stopped. Papers? Of course not. Coins? Barely. The guard points to your bundle. You hesitate, then, with your heart in your teeth, you unwrap the scroll, slowly, respectfully, like peeling back the layers of your own skin. You hold it out. The guard squints. Sees Hebrew. Grimaces. Mumbles something about superstition. Waves you through with a shiver. You rewrap it without a word. By the time you reach the safe house, a cellar beneath a butcher shop, you can't feel your feet. But your hands still know the shape of each letter. Your father lets you hold the scroll one last time before hiding it behind a false wall. He makes you promise not to mention it. Not even in dreams. You nod. You never say the word Torah aloud again for years. But you recite it silently every night, like breathing. This is the paradox of the Ashkenazi journey. You run, but the scroll stays. In your mind. In your marrow. In the crumpled corner of a melody your grandmother used to hum while kneading dough, and though you don't know it yet, that same scroll, or one like it, will someday end up in a university library, or behind museum glass, or maybe even in your child's hands, read aloud in a language that doesn't quite fit but tries its best. For now, though, you sleep, wrapped in straw, holding truth in ink and parchment. And your dreams curl like letters on a trembling page. You're older now, old. Enough to carry water. Old enough to be sent to the market alone. Old enough to be blamed when the goats wander off, even though you're fairly certain it was your cousin's fault. But mostly, you're old enough to be trusted with stories. The kind adults lower their voices for. The kind that linger in the air long after the candles are out. In Prague, everything feels too old. The stones, the stories, the silence between bells. You live in the Jewish quarter, pressed up against crooked alleys where even the moon hesitates to shine too brightly. The ghetto walls don't just keep people out, they hold memory in like steam from a pot that's been cooking for 500 years. Tonight, your uncle lights a candle and tells you about the golem. You've heard the tale before, of course. Everyone has. But tonight feels different. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe it's the way your uncle's voice drops when he says lo. The word Rabbi Judah Lo supposedly used to animate the creature from river clay. You can almost see it, massive, silent, obedient, lumbering through the alleyways to protect the Jews from blood libels and worse. A creature made not of vengeance, but necessity. A legend sculpted out of fear and hope. You see, your uncle says, when the world becomes unreasonable, Jews build something that doesn't ask questions. You frown. That sounds dangerous, he laughs. Exactly. The golem is a paradox, much like the people who imagined him. Silent but watchful. Lifeless but loyal. Power without speech. Strength without joy. The candle flickers as your uncle leans closer. Some say the golem still sleeps in the attic of the Altnuskal. That if things get bad again, will wake him. You nod solemnly, even as your cousin hides under a blanket. The truth, no one knows if the golem existed. Scholars argue. Some say the story was invented much later, a sort of proto-superhero myth. Others insist something real happened, something unrecorded but too big to forget. A few even claim that the Maharal, Rabbi Lo, was never interested in mysticism at all. But none of that matters to the boy in the candlelight, shivering with awe, clutching a piece of herring like it's a talisman. You, outside, the snow sighs against the shutters. But inside, there's music. Not the good kind, no violins or choirs, but the scrappy, nasal music of the badkin, the wedding jester. You duck beneath the curtain and peek into the courtyard where the celebration is already wobbling into its fourth hour. The bride looks stunned in lace. The groom, confused in buttons. And the badkin, wiry, crooked, somehow both old and ageless, is twirling between them with wild eyes and worse rhymes. He sings in Yiddish, sometimes Hebrew, sometimes nonsense. He makes fun of the rabbi, the father-in-law, the weather, and love itself. No one is safe. Everyone laughs. You don't understand half the jokes. But you laugh anyway. Later, the badkin drinks from someone else's cup and leans against the wall beside you. You learning yet? He asks. You nod, unsure what he means. Good. Don't get too smart. Makes the jokes harder. He burps, then mutters something about Babylonian scholars being terrible dancers. The badkin's role is misunderstood outside your community. Gentiles call him a clown, a buffoon. But you know better. He's the one who carries pain in a pocket and pulls it out at the worst possible moment, then makes it funny. He's the bridge between mourning and joy. Between the golem and the Torah, and he's fluent in coded speech. There's a rumor that during pogroms, badkinim carried messages across borders by embedding them in wedding songs. That if you listen closely, a punchline could become a warning. A pun could save a life. You believe it. Later that night, you find yourself repeating the golem story to your little sister. But you change the ending. In your version, the golem doesn't fall apart. He doesn't turn violent. He learns to write. He studies Torah. He becomes someone like the Rebbe. Your sister smiles in the dark. The Prague of your youth is haunted, but it's not hopeless. Every alley has a story. Every attic has a whisper. Every child knows to fear Fridays after sunset, not because of superstition, but because the wrong knock could mean exile, or worse. Still, life goes on. you memorize Talmud by day, deliver soup by night. You write letters you'll never send. You carve Hebrew into the frost on your window just to see if the ice remembers. One morning, you pass by the Altnuskul. You hesitate. You stare up at the attic window, nothing moves, but something watches. You imagine it again, the Golem, waiting. Not for orders. Not for vengeance. But for understanding. For someone to teach him the laws of logic and the art of kindness. You don't believe in monsters, but you believe in memory, and you begin to realize that Ashkenazi survival doesn't just depend on Torah or rituals or even cleverness. It depends on stories. On the transmission of terror and wit in the same breath. On the ability to laugh at death, then quote Rashi before breakfast, so you carry both, the Golem's shadow and the Badkin's song, folded together in your chest like parchment and string. And when your cousin starts to cry over spilled ink and bad grammar, you pat him on the back and whisper, "Lo." He blinks, you smile, "Don't worry," you say. It means something very old. And very strong. You're nearly a teenager now, which, in the shtetl, means you're expected to know the Torah, the price of onions, and how to patch a roof using only curses and twine. You're not quite there yet. But your Talmud skills, they're starting to smell promising. Like herring. Sharp, briny, impossible to ignore. Speaking of which, your study group meets in the back of a fish shop. It's not ideal. The benches are slick with scales, and every so often, a slippery tail slaps someone mid-argument. But the rent is cheap, and the owner, a barrel-chested widow named Bluma, likes the sound of boys shouting about Deuteronomy while she chops carp. Today, the topic is ownership. If a man finds a goat in the public square, does it belong to him? What if the goat winked first? What if the man already owns a goat and now feels emotionally torn? You're deep into it. A boy across from you, Yona, who claims to be descended from a Lithuanian genius with only 3 fingers and 6 opinions, says the Mishnah is clear. You say the Gemara contradicts him. He calls you a heretic. You call him late for breakfast. Bluma drops a fish on the table with a slap that silences the room. You, she says to Yona, are loud. And wrong. He, pointing to you, is slightly less loud. Possibly less wrong. And with that, class continues. The Rebbe visits sometimes. He doesn't teach. He observes, sitting like a quiet bear in a corner, nodding whenever someone finds a loophole juicy enough to be kosher. Occasionally he mutters something about logic being the highest form of affection. Then he leaves before anyone asks for clarification. You wonder if this is normal. If other people study theology between buckets of pickled entrails and rants about fish tariffs. Probably not. But then again, they probably don't solve inheritance law while covered in herring oil either. Scholars now speak of this era, 18th and 19th century Eastern Europe, as a crucible of Ashkenazi thought. Poverty was rampant. Pogroms were too frequent to name individually. Yet amid the smoke and mud, entire generations were raised on dialectics. On sacred contradiction. On the muscle memory of but what if? There's an open question among historians. Was this intense logic-driven education the seed of later scientific genius? Or was it merely a side effect, a cultural quirk, like eating sweet kugel with pepper? Hard to say. But you do know this, every time you ask a better question. The fish stink a little less, you go home with ink on your sleeve and fish scales in your boots. Your mother scolds you, then offers soup. Your father asks what you learned. You launch into a full explanation of how oxen damage liability applies to communal fences in crosswind conditions. He blinks. So. Don't trust goats. Exactly. At night, you reread your notes. Not because you have a test, tests are for the Russian school down the street, and nobody wants to end up there, but because the rhythm of the arguments calms you. Like a lullaby, if lullabies were full of legal hypotheticals and passive aggression, sometimes you argue with yourself. Out loud. You pace the floor. Hand waving, voice rising, quoting sources your neighbors can't hear and probably wouldn't believe if they did. A woman next door tells her daughter you've been possessed by a particularly bookish dibbuk. She's not entirely wrong. Still, your teachers begin to notice, not just the Rebbe, but the matchmaker. The mohel. Even the man who sharpens knives and occasionally barters in riddles, he's clever, they whisper. Too clever, maybe. Give it time. Cleverness is currency. But it's also a liability. You learn to temper your voice. To frame your brilliance as curiosity. To end every argument with, but of course, I'm probably wrong. Then smile humbly. This is considered charming. And possibly safe. Your uncle, the one who says sarcasm is the highest form of prayer, takes you aside one evening. You know what this is, right? He says, tapping your forehead. This logic thing. You shrug. It's armor, he says. Not protection. No, that's what hiding is for. This is different. This is the armor you wear so the world knows you're not to be dismissed. So when they ask why you're still here, you have 17 counterarguments ready. He ruffles your hair. You pretend to mind. That night, you dream of scrolls and courtrooms. Of fish that speak fluent Aramaic. Of rabbis playing chess with angels and always arguing about pawn structure. You wake up smiling. The next day at the shop, a boy named Leib tries to outlogic you on the issue of found property. You trap him in a corner using only 4 verses from Leviticus and a parable involving donkeys. Bluma throws you a piece of fried herring. It's greasy and magnificent. You'll do fine, she says. In a few years, you'll leave this town. You'll study in Vilna, maybe Krakow. You'll read Spinoza under your blanket and pretend not to understand him in public. You'll write tiny notes in the margins of books that you'll carry across oceans. You'll invent metaphors to survive lectures. You'll use Talmudic logic to debug physics problems. You'll annoy your university professors and enchant your children, but for now, here, in this little backroom of pickled genius and salted dreams, you are learning how to think, not what to think. Not even what to believe, but how to build a world out of contradiction, and to love it fiercely, even when it stinks of fish. You never meant to become a courier. You're not fast. You're not sneaky. You once tripped over your own tzitzit trying to avoid a goat with an attitude. But somehow, you've become the person trusted to carry things that aren't supposed to be carried. It starts with bread. Your mother bakes twice a week now, not because there's suddenly more flour, but because the authorities have banned Hebrew study in your region, and Allah has taken on new spiritual responsibilities. She calls you over one morning, dust still on her sleeves, and places a loaf in your hands. Take this to Reb Mendel across town, she says, almost casually. Tell him it's warm. You blink. It is warm. She gives you a look. That look. The one that says, don't ask questions you already know the answer to, Boychik. So you go. The bread is dense. Not just with raisins, but with weight. You can feel it shifting slightly in your arms as you walk. Not like dough. Like paper. Slips of parchment, maybe. Folded blessings. Excerpts from Pirkei Avot, inked in a hand you've seen before, your mother's, quick and neat and slightly tilted, like a woman who has to finish writing before the baby wakes up. You knock once. Twice. Mendel opens the door and takes the loaf without a word. His fingers linger on the crust like he's reading Braille. Later that night, he slips you a piece of it at a family gathering. You chew slowly, wondering if the Torah can be digested. You decide it can. Over time, you learn the code. Bread equals verses. Cake equals commentaries. If someone offers you rugula with cinnamon and no explanation, you're holding an encoded translation of Exodus, probably not accurate, but good enough to survive a midnight interrogation. The Russians don't know. The Poles don't care. The Germans pretend not to notice, until they do. Then it gets dangerous, but your mother keeps baking. You help knead, once. She slaps your hand when you try to add too much water. It's not just bread, she mutters. It's memory. You nod. Of course it is. memory is chewy, apparently. In the cellar beneath the synagogue, the older boys are copying texts onto scraps of cloth. Ink is scarce. One of them uses blackberry juice. Another boils soot and honey. A girl, yes, a girl, arrives with a stitched alphabet hidden in her apron hem. You're all accomplices now, the Rebbe doesn't stop you. He just says, if they ask, tell them it's embroidery practice. He's not smiling, you've begun to dream in hidden compartments. Bookshelves with false backs. Tefillin with microfilm inside. You imagine a world where every kippah holds a password, and every menorah lights up encrypted coordinates. Historians today will argue whether these tales are exaggerated. Some claim the smuggling was isolated. Others insist it was systemic, an underground network of matriarchs, midwives, and mildly heretical scribes. No one agrees, but you know what you lived. Your grandmother once stitched the Shema into a curtain. Your aunt read Song of Songs aloud while hanging laundry. Your cousin recited psalms disguised as lullabies to children too young to question the meter. They weren't resisting. Not officially. But the Torah they passed down wasn't in scrolls, it was in crust, thread, lullaby, and wink. One afternoon, while delivering pastries, you get stopped by a soldier. He's young. Bored. Cold, he eyes your basket. What's this? You try to smile. Sweets. For the holiday. What holiday? You freeze, a beat too long, he squints. You prepare to lie, then he shrugs. Don't care. Move along. You don't breathe until you're 2 streets away. The cinnamon buns are sweating. So are you. At home, your mother listens quietly, then presses your forehead to hers. Good boy, she whispers. Now go help your uncle. He's hiding ink again. There's a thrill to it. A danger. You feel important, but also very small. Like a footnote with delusions of grandeur. Still, you learn how to fold messages into the binding of a book. How to bake without breaking the seal. How to smile with your eyes when your mouth must lie, and you learn that women are the true scribes of your world, not officially, of course. Not in the cheddar. But in kitchens, in sewing circles, in bathhouses, in stories whispered between contractions, they preserve what men can't always reach. Your mother never calls herself a scholar. But when you misquote a passage, she corrects you while kneading dough. When you forget a blessing, she slips it into a bedtime story. When you ask who wrote the marginalia on that hidden scroll, she shrugs and hums a lullaby that rhymes suspiciously well with the Talmud's phrasing. You're beginning to see it, the quiet conspiracy of continuity. It's not loud. It doesn't march. It doesn't proclaim itself, but it bakes, it sings, it survives. Sometimes, when the wind is soft and the world briefly forgets to hate you, you imagine writing a book about this. About the theology of pastries. The eschatology of smuggled ink. You imagine scholars someday debating whether cake is canon. They'll laugh, and they'll never know how close they are to the truth. One Friday, your mother hands you a tiny roll, still warm. Give this to the midwife, she says. Tell her, thank you. You nod, you don't ask what's inside, you don't need to, you are a courier now. You are a disciple of dough, a prophet of parchment crumbs. You carry not just food, but a future, and every bite someone takes is another footstep through history, hidden in crust and carved with care. You've never seen so much water, it goes on forever, gray and restless, stretching past the horizon like a question without a rabbi. You've heard of oceans, of course. But hearing is not the same as sailing, and nothing in your shtetl prepared you for the heave and cough of a steamship at sea. You're seasick. Everyone is. Except your cousin Rachel, who insists she's immune because she once rode a runaway goat uphill for 10 minutes. She offers to help. You wave her away. Dying in silence feels more dignified. In your coat pocket is a book, small. Leather-bound. Edges worn soft from generations of thumbs. It's not a sitter, not exactly, more like a scrapbook of prayer and poetry. Copied over by your grandfather, who said he wasn't a poet but always smiled when he said the word ahava. The book still smells faintly of horseradish and candle wax. Your name is on a manifest now. Misspelled, of course. The immigration officer at Ellis Island blinks at your papers, shrugs, and decides you are now something shorter, rounder, and easier to fit in his mouth. Just like that, the old you is an alias, behind you is Europe, ahead of you is America, but in your pocket? That's still home. When you finally land, the streets don't glitter like they promised. They reek of coal and cabbage and disappointment. Tenement windows blink with exhaustion. Children run barefoot in January. And the language, oi, the language. Harsh, clunky, full of R's that sound like sneezes. You try saying roof and end up saying rough. The adults are busy. Paperwork, jobs, whispers about the union. No time for unpacking memories. No time for books. But at night, you take yours out. You read the prayers, even when the English alphabet tries to distract you with its strange loops and gaps. You whisper the Shema in a shared bedroom with 5 cousins and a leaking pipe, and the book listens. Some days, school is terrifying. The teacher shouts your name wrong, assigns you spelling lists full of words like night and subtle, and asks why you bring your lunch wrapped in old newspaper. You pretend not to care. At recess, a boy calls you Hebe and steals your marbles. You call him something in Yiddish that your mother would disapprove of. The marbles remain gone, but your dignity survives. You start a new habit, tucking a Hebrew word into your pocket each morning, like a charm. One day it's or, light. Another day, emet, truth. These words feel warm. Grounded. They don't change when spoken aloud. You begin to notice something odd. Other children, Polish, Italian, Irish, carry their languages like coats they plan to outgrow. But you? You wear yours under your skin. It's not just Yiddish either. It's the rhythm of the Aleph Bet. The twist of Talmudic logic. The sigh at the end of a sentence that means but God knows better. One night, your father comes home with calloused hands and a new word, strike. He's angry. Hungry. Hopeful. He doesn't sit to eat until you've recited the psalm your mother taught you. You stumble, forget a line. He corrects you gently. Don't lose the music, he says. You write it down in the margin of your book. Don't lose the music. That book, it becomes your secret map, not to success. Not even to survival. To self, every torn corner, every smudge of thumb oil, every page a whispered reminder that you are not a mistake in translation. You are not broken English. You are continuity in ink. Scholars will debate the immigrant experience, how much was lost, how much gained. Some will claim assimilation was total. Others will say tradition held firm. The truth lives in the margins. In the child who recites Modeh Ani with one eye on a spelling test. In the girl who hides a Torah portion inside her arithmetic notebook. In you. You make friends with a boy named Harold who quotes Longfellow and doesn't know what cholent is. You teach him. He teaches you baseball. You think maybe that's how nations are built, not with parades, but with odd friendships and borrowed sandwiches. One morning, your teacher assigns a poem. You panic. English still feels like someone else's jacket, stiff in the shoulders, awkward in the sleeves. But then you remember a line your grandfather once wrote, the soul, when tired, curls up in a corner of the tongue. You translate it, shakily. Your teacher weeps. From that day on, she lets you write whatever you want, so long as you don't stop. The book in your pocket grows lighter. Not because it's empty, but because its contents have moved into your spine. One night, you dream in both alphabets. In the dream, Ellis Island isn't a gate, it's a classroom. Lady Liberty holds a blackboard. Your mother bakes kugel on the dock while your father debates a policeman about kashrut. Everything smells like apples and ink, and when you wake, your accent is still thick, but your heart is fluent. You keep the book, you carry it through promotions, through rejections, through subway tunnels and borrowed suits. It survives a flood, a lost suitcase, a moment of doubt when you almost let it go. You don't, because it's not just a book, it's a passport, and no one, not even America, can take that from you. The sun hasn't risen yet, but you have. Your boots are already on, stiff, too small, but warm enough if you double your socks. Your school bag hangs from your shoulder, patched with someone else's initials. And in your hand, a crust of black bread, still soft in the middle, wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. You don't read the headlines. They're never about you. You slip out the door. Outside, the streets of the Lower East Side are a quilt of smoke, slush, and shouting. The milkman sings in Ladino. Someone is already arguing about the price of radishes. A trolley bell clangs like a stubborn alarm clock. And you, barely 12, duck through it all with a prayer half-muttered in your throat. The yeshiva is only 6 blocks away, but it feels like miles. Inside, the benches are hard, the windows drafty, and the Rebbe's sharp, not unkind, just precise, like knives honed on syllables. They expect your mind to be sharper than your shoes. Today's topic, the laws of intent in morning blessings. You're exhausted, but your hand still rises. The Rebbe narrows his eyes. If you're thinking about gratitude while reciting the blessing, but not feeling it, does the blessing still count? The class murmurs. You answer, only if the thought is sincere enough to tremble. He pauses. Then nods, fair. You beam, but you also yawn, because you were up late again, not studying. Sewing, your job is on Grand Street, 3rd floor of a factory that smells like wet wool and regret. 40 girls and 3 boys sit elbow to elbow, eyes burning, fingers flying. Shirts, pants, coats, thousands of stitches, none your own. Your shift starts at 4 p.m. and ends when your fingers cramp. They pay by the piece. You earn just enough for rent, bread, and maybe a little sugar for Shabbos. No one knows you study Torah in the morning. Not here. They know you as the quiet one, the kid who hums strange melodies while threading a needle, who counts seams like blessings and breaks needles more than most. You hum Ein Kelekinu when you're bored, you recite psalms when your back aches, you do long division in your head to stay awake. It isn't noble. It's necessary. Your father says it's temporary. Just until the store does better. Your mother says not to worry, that even the Baal Shem Tov peeled potatoes before he became holy. You try to believe them, but sometimes, your book slips out of your coat. It's the same one from home, the little worn one, full of side notes and crumbs. You hide it under the work table, sneak glances when the foreman isn't looking. The pages smell like ink and lint and the peppermint your sister keeps giving you for luck. One evening, a girl notices. She's maybe 15, with oil-streaked curls and eyes that don't blink enough. You read Hebrew? She asks, not quite amazed, not quite accusing. You nod. My Zayd taught me the Aleph Bet before he died, she mutters. But I forgot most of it. You flip to a psalm and point. She reads, halting, crooked, like someone trying to remember a song from childhood. Then she smiles. You pass her the book during breaks after that. She reads a little more each day. Eventually, she copies a line on the inside of her cuff with tailor's chalk. It becomes your secret yeshiva. Row by row, stitch by stitch, book by book, at actual yeshiva, your rabbi notices you doze off more. He doesn't scold you. Instead, he assigns you tutoring. Not for you, for others. Kids who can't grasp Gemara. Kids who stammer when parsing Rashi. You're patient. And you're too tired to be smug. Teach with your hands, he tells you. You don't understand what he means, until one day, while sewing, you explain the laws of purity using thread tension as a metaphor. The girls get it, you do too, because learning isn't just in books. It's in fingertips, in posture, in the ache of endurance. It's in turning even exhaustion into sacred rhythm. Some evenings, you walk home with a friend from the yeshiva. He jokes that you'll be a rabbi one day, or a lawyer. Maybe a poet. You don't say anything, but you wonder, not about success, that feels distant, You wonder if the Torah is strong enough to live in the shadows of factories, in the lint behind your knees, in the calluses on your palms. You decide yes, because even if you forget a verse, your hands remember something truer. Historians will later write about this generation, children of sweatshops and dreams. Raised on fumes and formulas. They'll say it was impossible. That the workload broke them. That the Torah couldn't survive it, but you know better. You stitched the law of kindness into every hem. You hummed verses under your breath while repairing buttonholes. You calculated velocity using the rhythm of a foot pedal. You translated Rashi into chalk marks on a steen-creased collar. You didn't survive despite it, you survived through it, and when your cousin graduates from Columbia while still quoting Psalms under her breath, you'll grin and remember how she once traced Hebrew into the dust behind a Singer sewing machine. The factory eventually closes. You keep the book. You move on, maybe to teaching, maybe to medicine, maybe to string theory. But part of you will always remember what Torah sounds like when drowned out by 100 chattering needles. It's quiet, but it doesn't vanish, it waits, like you did, every morning, before the sun. It's Shabbos afternoon, and the apartment smells like something sacred, not incense. Not candles. But beans. Garlic. A faint tang of vinegar and slow-cooked beef fat so rich, it could turn atheists into believers. The cholent has been simmering since last night, tucked under a blanket, above a radiator, blessed by time and aluminum foil. You sit at the table, not because you're hungry, you've already eaten 2 rolls and half a cucumber, but because your uncle is here. And your uncle, frankly, is better than any rabbi. He's not called a rabbi, of course. He's a dyer by trade. Spends the week elbows deep in vats of indigo, breathing in chemicals that probably shaved a few years off his lifespan. But on Shabbos? He's the king of 3 things, cholent, chess, and chemical theory. Right now, he's preparing to checkmate you using only 3 pieces and a quote from the Kuzari. You know, he says, nudging his knight into danger, they used to say that color is just light arguing with matter. You frown at the board, that's not Talmud. It's science, he shrugs. Same thing, different accent. You lose 5 moves later. Again, but you don't mind. Because afterward, he pulls out a small notebook, the kind you're technically not supposed to write in on Shabbos, but he says thought experiments don't count, and walks you through a theory he's been working on, why certain dyes set better on wool than on cotton. And how maybe, just maybe, it's about the way each fabric remembers heat. You're only 13. But you understand, because memory lives in more than brains. It lives in fabric. In flavor. In the way cholent sticks to the pot even after 3 scrubbings. Your uncle's apartment is a museum of contradiction. On one shelf, Maimonides. On the next, a German chemistry textbook he says he borrowed from a Gentile who never asked for it back. Above the sink, a crumbling mezuzah. On the wall, a map of constellations, marked with Hebrew nicknames. He wears tzitzit under a lab coat. He quotes Rashi while explaining osmosis. And every once in a while, he mutters a Kabbalistic phrase before opening the pickle jar, just in case. You ask him if he ever wanted to be a rabbi, he laughs so hard, he spills wine. I wanted to dye the sky purple, he says. That felt holier. You don't quite understand, but something in you begins to itch, a curiosity with no clear bracha. You start keeping a notebook, too. Hebrew on one side. Equations on the other. You practice balancing chemical reactions the way your older brother practices balancing a sefer on one finger. One day, you bring a riddle to your uncle. If the laws of thermodynamics say energy can't be destroyed. But the Torah says the soul returns to God, does that mean the soul is a closed system? He looks at you, good, he says. Now ask it in Yiddish. This is your world now. Weekdays, you recite verses. Evenings, you solve equations in the margins. You use gematria to remember molecular weights. You sneak into libraries not to rebel, but to expand. Your Rebbe tells you, gently, to be careful. Too much science and the soul forgets where it sleeps. You nod, but you keep reading. At home, your uncle continues his experiments, testing natural dyes, trying to recreate teklit, the ancient blue once used on priestly garments. He says it's out there, somewhere, hidden in a mollusk or maybe a footnote. He's not wrong. Years later, a scientist will publish a paper on that very pigment, and his name won't be your uncle's. But the results will smell like cholent and vinegar and hope. Historians might say this era, the turn of the 20th century, was the beginning of the great Ashkenazi divergence. When scholars split, half into synagogues, half into science labs, but that's too neat. In truth, the split never happened. Because in apartments like this one, tucked between factories and yeshivas, among checkmates and cholent, young minds learned that questioning was a mitzvah, and observation a form of prayer. Your cousin, the one who always steals the last kishka slice, starts writing poetry about combustion. You help, she rhymes covalent bond with divine respond. Your uncle calls it heresy. Then requests a copy. At school, your teacher finds your notebook. She stares at the margin where you've scribbled a chemical formula under the words God is one. She asks, gently, is this a mistake? You shake your head, no, you say. It's how I remember. She blinks, then returns the book. Years pass, you outgrow your uncle's chairs. You stop losing at chess. You learn to cook cholent yourself, though yours always burns a little, probably because you try to calculate optimal layering using steam distribution models. Still, on Shabbos, you visit, you bring new questions. New books. New theories. Your uncle listens. Then smiles the way only someone does when they see their legacy not as a name on a page, but as a kid at their table, still asking, still arguing, still tasting the infinite in a spoonful of beans. You're in the Bronx now, not the quiet Bronx of old cemeteries and sleepy bakeries, but the noisy one, elevated trains rattling overhead, bagel carts on every corner. Kids playing stickball in the street and quoting psalms between pitches. The whole place hums like a nervous violin, just slightly out of tune. You're at a cafe. No sign, no menu, no waiters. Just chipped porcelain mugs, a never-cleaned samovar, and 3 men who meet here every Tuesday to argue about the secrets of the universe. You've been invited to sit in, you're not sure why. Maybe it's because of the paper you published in a student journal, something about time dilation and prayer schedules. Maybe it's because one of them is your uncle's friend from Minsk. Or maybe they just needed a fourth to cover the cost of tea. They're already arguing, not angrily. Passionately. The way Talmud students argue over whether lighting the Shabbat candles before or after sunset affects the angels, except today's topic isn't candles, it's quantum entanglement, and whether Einstein was being too cautious when he called it spooky action at a distance. One of them, an elderly man with a crooked beard and 2 pens in his breast pocket, slams his palm down. He feared God more than uncertainty. Another chuckles. Einstein feared nothing except his mother's kugel. You sit there, silently stunned, trying to understand how a conversation can leap from particle duality to rabbinic commentary on dreams in the book of Genesis. But that's the thing about Ashkenazi brilliance, it doesn't recognize the boundary between sacred and scientific. If a thing can be questioned, it can be holy. If it can be disproven, it can be loved anyway. Someone hands you a napkin and a pencil stub. Draw your argument, says the quietest of them, a man with wild eyebrows and a mind like an accordion. Words get in the way. You sketch something. Tentative. Embarrassed, he studies it. Then nods. Then tears off a piece of his own napkin and revises your diagram, folds it, tilts it, annotates it in Hebrew, Yiddish, and math. It's beautiful. This is what the textbooks don't say, that behind every big discovery, there was a coffee-stained table. A half-burnt cigarette and someone whispering, but what if the soul is non-local? You begin to visit the cafe more often, not every Tuesday. You still have a job. You still have Shabbos prep. But on days when your brain buzzes and your body aches, you find yourself back there, sipping bitter tea, doodling with equations, tossing ideas like blessings and curses across sticky tables. They call themselves the minyan. Not a formal prayer quorum. Not always 10 people. But enough minds to keep the divine spark of curiosity alive. some of them are physicists. One is a tailor with a secret talent for calculating fractals. One woman, who never gives her name, writes poetry that accidentally proves things about thermodynamics. They argue like yeshiva students, they call each other Rebbe. They joke about entropy like it's an old uncle who always forgets his coat. One week, you bring a copy of Einstein's latest paper, the room goes quiet, then erupts, someone reads a passage out loud in a fake German accent. Someone else counters with a quote from Maimonides. They break the whole thing down, line by line. Proof by proof, until one of them sighs and mutters, "Brilliant, yes." But he still doesn't get cholent. They laugh, but it's not dismissive, they admire Einstein deeply. But they also know something he might not, that genius doesn't always mean solitary, that sometimes, the smartest mind in the room is the room itself. Years from now, historians will trace the rise of Jewish scientists in the early 20th century, a burst of innovation, disproportionate, dazzling, statistically confounding. They'll talk about immigration patterns, about rigorous education, about cultural emphasis on books, logic, inquiry. They'll mention names: Oppenheimer, Feynman, Wigner, Szilard, von Neumann. But they won't mention this cafe, they won't mention you, or the nameless woman with the poetry, or the tailor with the pocket calculator, or the napkin with the folds that solved a paradox before lunch. But that's okay, because the cafe was never about credit. It was about combustion, the chemical kind, sure, but also the human kind. The kind that ignites when ideas bump into each other in the steam of tea and the glow of possibility. You start writing again. Not just equations. Thoughts. Hopes. Theology tangled in physics. Dreams shaped like curved space. You begin a notebook titled Midrash on the uncertainty principle. One night, you write, if the universe began with light, and light behaves like both wave and particle, then perhaps faith must do the same. You show it to the accordion mind man. He squints, then grins. You're ready, he says, for what? He shrugs. Whatever's next. Einstein once said that God does not play dice with the universe. The minion disagrees. They think maybe he does. But only because he enjoys teaching probability. You're in Stockholm now, or at least, your thoughts are, physically. You're still sitting in your apartment in Brooklyn, between a leaky radiator and a stack of unpaid bills. But your mind? It's on the other side of the Atlantic, where a certain cousin, the one who always corrected your Hebrew pronunciation, is being handed a gold medallion and a handshake from a Scandinavian man with better posture than anyone you've ever met. She's won the Nobel Prize, and not just any Nobel. Physics. You're not surprised, exactly. She was always sharp. Always scribbling equations on matzo boxes and muttering in her sleep about thermal expansion. But still, the image of her in a gown, on that polished stage, standing next to kings and laureates, it stings. In a good way. Like strong horseradish, you pour yourself tea, no sugar. You're watching your heart. Not your emotions, your literal heart. Your emotions are wild and thriving. On the wall above your table is a photo. Grainy, black and white, fading at the corners. 10 men, all Ashkenazi. Some bearded, some bald, one with the saddest eyes you've ever seen. It's from the early 50s, taken in a cramped faculty lounge at Columbia. They called it the Nobel Minyan. 8 laureates. 2 waiting. They used to meet every Thursday afternoon. No prayer. Just argument. Loud, fierce, Talmudic. About nuclear theory. Genetics. Economics. And once, famously, about whether their mothers would be more impressed by Stockholm or a good seat at synagogue on Yom Kippur. They took turns leading, not with titles, but with questions. Does randomness prove design? If atoms are mostly empty space, what does that say about loneliness? Is there a halakhic ruling on Schrödinger's cat? The laughter in that room was thick. Warm. And just slightly judgmental. You went once, snuck in through the back with a paper you thought was brilliant. It wasn't. They tore it apart like a piece of overcooked kugel. But afterward, one of them patted your shoulder and said, "We only bother arguing with people who might someday deserve it." You never forgot that, back then, people said it was a fluke, this sudden wave of Jewish genius. That something about the ghettos, the pogroms, the exile, had churned out minds like fine knives. That centuries of arguing with God made Jews naturally suited to argue with the universe, maybe. But you know better, you remember the shtetls. The cramped libraries. The broken glasses taped together and passed between brothers. You remember the mothers who taught calculus disguised as card games. The grandfathers who compared atoms to angels. The girls who read Freud by flashlight and wrote their dreams in Talmud margins. This wasn't sudden, this was earned, one small answer at a time. Still, it feels surreal, that in one generation, just one, the grandchildren of bakers and peddlers became the authors of new laws of nature. That the same people who once prayed not to be noticed became the ones lighting up entire blackboards with chalk dust equations. Historians will puzzle over it, they'll chart IQ tests. Study dietary habits. Investigate gene pools like archaeologists sifting through ancient bones. Some will make uncomfortable suggestions. Others will overcorrect and say it was all coincidence. They'll miss the essence, they'll miss the way your people practice curiosity like religion, how each question was sacred, how humility wasn't a weakness, but a discipline, how a child's why was treated with the same gravity as a rabbi's sermon. They'll miss the fact that the Nobel minion wasn't just 10 brains, it was 10 souls built from centuries of listening, learning, and lighting candles against the dark. One of them, the one with the sad eyes, refused the prize. He said it felt strange to be honored for something others died trying to teach. He donated the money. Never told anyone where, rumor is he gave it to a yeshiva. Others say he mailed it anonymously to his mother's village in Poland. Either way, he kept coming to the Thursday meetings, kept asking better questions. You look back at the photo, you remember their voices. The rustle of papers. The scratch of pens. The smell of fish sandwiches eaten too close to Einstein's equations. Yes, he came once. Said nothing. Took notes. Your cousin sends you a telegram, it says only, "We did it." Also, Bubby would be furious I wore pants. You laugh, and for the first time in a while, you feel a kind of peace. Not the quiet kind. The humming kind. The kind that vibrates behind your ribs. Like a chalkboard just before a great idea, because you know now, even if your name is never called from that Stockholm stage, even if your only award is a nephew who spells tachyon correctly at age 8, even if your greatest achievement is folding the universe into a bedtime story, you're still part of the minyan, not by Nobel, by neshama. You're not sure when it started, this obsession the outside world has with your brain, not you, specifically. But people like you. Ashkenazi. Slightly anxious. Fond of pickled things. People whose grandparents spoke 7 languages but couldn't find their shoes. People who do crosswords in pen and argue with GPS. You remember the first time you read it in a headline, "Why are Ashkenazi Jews so smart?" You felt weird, like someone had just measured your skull and then offered you a trophy. It wasn't flattering. It was clinical. Cold. Like someone had turned your family's suffering into a lab experiment and wrapped it in statistical analysis, IQ tests, genetic studies, neurological scans. Even your spit got mailed off for analysis. Somewhere in a freezer, there's probably a sample labeled Cousin Miriam, above average spatial reasoning, below average sense of direction. It's strange being studied, especially when you grew up being ignored. But the questions persist. Is it the genes, the culture, the history? Maybe it's the cholent. Science tries to answer. One study suggests a cluster of genetic traits linked to verbal reasoning and mathematical ability, traits more common in populations with a long history of literacy-based professions. Another points to centuries of exclusion from landowning, which funneled your ancestors into professions of the mind. Merchants, scholars, doctors, moneylenders, All jobs where thinking fast could mean surviving the month. Some even argue that persecution played a role. That every generation trimmed away those who couldn't adapt quickly enough. Natural selection in the most unnatural of ways, it's all very compelling. And very unsettling, because what if you don't feel brilliant? What if you've never solved a theorem or published a paper or built a better mousetrap? What if the smartest thing you've done this week is remember your aunt's kugel recipe without calling her? Are you still part of the story? Yes, because brains aren't just for equations, they're for memory. For empathy. For jokes that require 3 layers of cultural reference and end with a shrug. Your people don't just know things. They notice things. They read the room. They listen between the lines. They see patterns in chaos and find rhythm in noise. You once watched your grandfather, barely literate in English, beat a Harvard grad at chess using nothing but instinct and spite. He didn't know the theory. He felt the board. So what makes Ashkenazi intellect? Maybe it's not one thing, maybe it's the constant tension between tradition and adaptation. The way you're expected to revere your ancestors, and also correct their logic. Maybe it's the relentless dialogue. The constant questioning. The kitchen table debates about whether GD prefers precision or chutzpah, or maybe, just maybe, it's the mothers, the ones who made you memorize the periodic table and your cousin's Hebrew birthday. The ones who could quote Freud and also threaten you with a sandal, the ones who taught you that being smart is good, but being kind is better. One scientist, years ago, tried to isolate the Ashkenazi intelligence gene. He gave up. Why? Because there were too many variables. Too much chaos. Too many kids solving math problems while peeling potatoes and humming Yiddish lullabies. You read about his failure. And you smiled, because that's the point. You can't bottle this, you can't chart it on a graph, because it lives in too many places, in bedtime stories and Talmud pages, in whispers under covers and arguments on stoops, in lullabies disguised as algebra and riddles wrapped in recipes. It lives in tension, like that between the particle and the wave, like that between exile and home. Like that between a young girl staring at a Torah scroll, and the same girl, 50 years later, winning a MacArthur grant for her research on artificial synapses. Brains. Genes. Everything in between. Science will keep trying, and that's fine. Let them map the alleles, let them build models. You'll be here, teaching your niece that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell and that Rabbi Akiva started studying at 40. Both are true, both matter. One gets you into college, the other gets you through life. You're in a cramped parlor now, somewhere between Krakow and Brooklyn, and there's a fiddle crying in the corner. No, not crying, laughing. Sputtering. Telling a joke so old it loops back around to profound. And next to the fiddle, a clarinet chimes in, doing its best impression of a gossiping neighbor who knows exactly how many eggs you borrowed last week and why. This is klezmer. It isn't quiet. It isn't dignified. It doesn't sit still in synagogues or hang politely in concert halls. It twirls. It shimmies. It laughs while weeping and weeps while laughing, a music born from exile, sharpened in wedding tents and whispered in alleyways. A genre where joy and sorrow wear the same hat. You grew up thinking Jews were only good at 2 things, arguing and inventing things to worry about. But then your cousin picks up a bow and proves you wrong. She plays like she's chasing memory, no notes on paper. Just intuition, calluses, and an uncanny ability to find the ache in any melody. Your grandfather used to hum along with her. Not to her, with her. Like they were having a conversation across generations, one in E minor. But it's not just folk music. Your people wrote everything. Mendelssohn rewrote the sound of 19th century Europe. Mahler dreamed symphonies that felt like whole empires collapsing in slow motion. Schoenberg broke tonality like the Baal Shem Tov broke norms, with purpose, with fire. Even Gershwin, the boy who turned jazz into opera, did it while sneaking Yiddish phrasing into the rhythm. Rhapsody in Blue. That opening clarinet glissando might as well be saying oy vey in 12 bars, but here's what most people miss: these weren't just composers, they were translators, they took the sound of shtetls, of marketplaces, of whispered blessings and shouted insults, and smuggled it into concert halls. They weren't abandoning their heritage, they were amplifying it. You hear it in the syncopation, in the minor thirds, in the way a melody doubles back on itself like someone second-guessing their own thoughts. Even the silences in Jewish music aren't empty. They're pauses for argument. You try writing music once, not for fame, just to see if you can trap that feeling, that tension between nostalgia and nausea, between yearning and knowing better. You borrow your aunt's piano. Press the keys like you're testing old floorboards. It's clumsy, but something hums. Eventually, you start composing pieces in secret. Tiny ones. For violin, for flute, for heartache. You title them things like Elegy for a Broken Bagel or Lullaby for When the Rent is Due. One gets played at a cousin's wedding, people cry, someone says it reminds them of a song their mother used to sing while folding laundry. Another swears they heard the tune at a funeral 20 years ago. Neither is right, both are right. That's the magic. Jewish music isn't about originality. It's about layering, quoting, echoing. It's a midrash in sound, building on themes, arguing with predecessors, slipping in a punchline between staves. You realize, eventually, that your family has always done this. Your great-grandfather hummed Niggunim while reading physics journals. Your mother whistled arias while kneading challah. Your sister plays cello and insists Bach was just a fancy Batkin with better posture. Music was never just background, it was code. For grief. For joy. For resistance. During the war, partisans passed messages in melodies. In ghettos, lullabies held entire escape plans. After the war, survivors sang because silence would have broken them faster. There's a Yiddish saying, a niggin can carry what a wagon cannot. You believe it, because sometimes, the only thing standing between despair and survival is a single note, slightly off-key, hummed under a breath that refuses to stop breathing. One day, your niece asks what klezmer means. You pause, then say, it's the sound your soul makes when it remembers everything at once. She nods, picks up her violin, plays a scale, and something ancient stirs, because even if the Nobel chart skipped you, even if your equations never left the notebook, even if your biggest invention is a kugel that doesn't collapse in the middle, you still wrote music, with your life, with your questions, with every pause between prayers, and someone, someday, will hear it, and hum along. You're staring at a whiteboard, it's filled with symbols, arrows, deltas, Greek letters, and somewhere in the corner, someone's doodled a potato with legs and labeled it uncertainty spot. Nobody knows who drew it. Everyone respects it. You're in a neuroscience lab now, not the kind with bubbling beakers or dramatic lightning. No, this place smells like coffee, freezer burn, and determination. Machines blink quietly. Mice sleep in clear boxes. And you? You're trying to answer a question nobody knows how to ask properly. What, exactly, is memory? You think about your own, the way your grandfather's hands moved when tying tzitzit. The smell of burnt onions in a holiday kugel. The rhythm of your mother's ladle hitting the side of the soup pot, steady as a heartbeat. None of it written down. All of it unshakably real, so you run tests. Measure neuron firing patterns. Analyze pathways. Stimulate cortexes. Build models that attempt to explain why certain phrases, like Shane's 6D Lev 1, make your chest clench with something very close to yearning, and the more you learn about the brain, the more convinced you become. The shtetl never left, it just moved in, somewhere between the hippocampus and the basal ganglia. Your ancestors are still arguing about what to do with that leftover gefilte fish. Their memories didn't disappear, they rewrote themselves into your neurology. You call this your Bubby hypothesis. It doesn't get you published, but it makes your students laugh. Then think, one of them, a sleep-deprived postdoc from Belarus, asks if there's any empirical proof that trauma can transmit culturally. You show her a study, then you show her a recipe. The study says yes. The recipe proves it, because how else can you explain the fact that you still flinch when you hear sirens, even though you've never fled anything more dangerous than a bus stop argument? Or that you instinctively double-wrap bread, just like your great-grandmother did during wartime, it's all still there, encoded, like folklore embedded in the folds of DNA. Some scientists scoff at this. They want clean data. Neat conclusions. You smile politely and offer them tea. Then tell them how your uncle used to recite the 10 Commandments while fixing circuit boards, just to make sure he didn't accidentally commit a sin with the wrong resistor. They blink. Then take notes. Your field calls it epigenetic memory. A poetic way of saying, your body remembers things you never lived. Your people have another word for it, Mizora. Transmission, a lineage not of blood, but of practice. Of melody. Of minuscule gestures, like how you tap a book before closing it, or how you tear halal with your hands even when there's a knife right there. At night, your dreams are cluttered, not with fame or fortune, but with echoes. A cracked oil lamp flickering in a corner. A rebbe murmuring over a child's head. The scratch of a quill on parchment. You wake up knowing things no textbook taught you, like how to fold a prayer shawl without creasing the fringe. Or how to calculate Sabbath candle timings without a clock, just the sun, the birds, and your grandmother's sense of urgency. Sometimes, you wonder, are you a neuroscientist with a spiritual complex, or a yeshiva boy who accidentally grew a lab coat? You decide it doesn't matter, because your lab notes are now full of analogies from Pirkei Avot. Your research presentations quote Rashi. Your experiments on long-term potentiation are structured like a Talmudic sugya, question. Contradiction, resolution, new question, and it works. Students stay after class just to argue with you about whether consciousness is local or distributed, and whether that's basically the same as the Shekinah. You're proud, not just of the research, but of the way you carry the shtetl with you, in every neuron diagram, every analogy, every smuggled joke about your Uncle Moishi and the synaptic vesicles, because here's the truth, you can leave the shtetl, but the shtetl doesn't leave you. It's in the way you problem solve like you're decoding a verse. In the way you approach the unknown with cautious affection. In the way you prefer 10 small arguments over one big conclusion. And if the world ever asks, why do Ashkenazi Jews think the way they do? You'll answer, because our grandmothers stirred science into soup, and our grandfathers told bedtime stories about atoms before bedtime was even a thing, because we learned to rewire the brain the same way we rewired exile, with grit, humor, and stubborn joy, because memory, in our tradition, isn't passive, it's a mitzvah. The lights are off now, not because you're asleep, not yet, but because you've started to enjoy the way memory glows in the dark. There's a hush in the room. A stillness. Like even the radiator is holding its breath, waiting for the final note in a song that started centuries ago. You're lying in bed, but your mind is walking, back through alleyways of Krakow. Through the door of a sweatshop on Grand Street. Into a tiny study in Vilna where a mother once lit Sabbath candles with trembling hands and a steady heart. You walk past your own past, the dreams you thought were failures, the questions you never stopped asking, the poems you never admitted were prayers, and in this moment, this small, flickering moment, you finally understand, you are the inheritance, not the land. Not the trophies. Not the names carved on stone, you, with your tangled thoughts and your 3 versions of the truth, you, who solve logic puzzles like their Talmud and cry during commercials about lost dogs, you, who still feel guilty for not calling your aunt back, even though she only ever talks about her bunions. You carry the ink, the parchment, the stubborn melody of survival. It's in your posture when you listen. It's in the rhythm of your complaints. It's in the way you answer a question with, it depends, and mean it. It's in your bookshelves and your baking, in your refusal to throw away a broken toaster because maybe someone can use the parts. In your instinct to light candles, even if only scented ones now, when the week has been too long, in your habit of keeping stories. Especially the ones no one else remembers. There's no Nobel for this, no certificate, no velvet invitation, just the quiet knowledge that you are the result of every whispered blessing that made it past the border, every page that was copied in hiding, every lullaby that carried coded hope, every joke that turned fear into something manageable, even laughable. Every gesture that said, we're still here. We're still learning. We're still humming. You once asked what made your people so resilient. Now you know, it wasn't just brilliance. Or genetics. Or Talmud, it was continuity, the way fire passes from candle to candle, undimmed, undiminished, the way a story passes from mouth to mouth, even when no one remembers where it began, the way memory lives in fingers and food and song. You are the living answer to 1,000 impossible questions, you are the scholar and the seamstress. The scientist and the storyteller. The question and the contradiction. The melody and the math, you are the child with honey on your aleph, you are the woman smuggling verses in a loaf of bread. You are the uncle muttering quantum theory over chess and cholent, you are the rebbe, the rag picker, the reluctant revolutionary, and now, in the quiet dark, in this moment of stillness and wait, you are simply you. But that is not simple, that is everything, so rest, let your neurons settle, let your memories drift, the shtetl is safe now, in your chest, the scroll is dry and waiting, the lamp is low, but it still burns, and somewhere, softly, the music begins again. Now that the story has quieted, let's take one last breath together, feel the rhythm in your chest, not rushed, not worried, just steady, like an old lullaby hummed behind a closed door. You've wandered far tonight. Across centuries. Across empires, through candlelit shtetls, loud factories, whispered classrooms, and kitchens where even silence had seasoning, you've met tailors who quoted Torah, mothers who smuggled psalms in dough, children who learned physics by lamplight and still remembered to bless the bread, and maybe, just maybe, you saw yourself in one of them, in a habit. A joke. A doubt, a tenderness you carry without realizing, that's the thing about memory. It doesn't live in the past, it lives in you, breathing, shifting, softening the sharp edges of time. Tonight, we didn't tell a story, we passed one down, the way your people always have, with questions, and crumbs, and quiet resilience, and as the room stills, as the glow from the screen fades to something gentle, let your thoughts drift without chasing them, let them fold like prayer shawls, let them rest, because you are not alone in the dark. You are the end of someone's prayer, the beginning of someone's answer, the next verse in a very old song, and tonight, that is enough, so sleep easy, the story will wait, it always does.